and I'm a literary agent at Lily Media, and I represent middle grade, YA, and adult fiction. And I'm a fan of all things romance, science fiction, fantasy, mysteries, thrillers, all that good stuff.
I'm Joanna Volpe. I also work at Lily Media with Suzie. I represent everything from picture books to adult fiction and nonfiction. I tend to go towards things that are very geeky or dark or quirky. Don't need romance in my books. So that's, when I say I represent everything, it's not everything. It's just I'm willing to look at things that follow those themes in all areas.
I'm Carlie Weber, and my agency is CK Weber Associates. We represent fiction for people ages 8 and up, so middle grade, young adult, and a wide variety of adults. And basically, this is how I'm going to wrap up what I like to read. I like to read things that are the opposite of my life. I live in a suburban area. I work part-time as a librarian. I have 2 cats. My life is pretty boring. So I like to read thrillers, suspense. I love controversial, YA that causes conversation. So I like my blood and guts. I love horror, which is not to say that I'm not willing to look at a sweet romance, but I really like dark stuff. I would love to see a psychological thriller soon too. That's my new thing I want.
Our moderator's here.
Yay!
You guys already done the introduction?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Laura, I'm the moderator. Okay, so let's start out with just the basics. So what is a query and why do writers need to write them?
A query is basically a short bio of your book. I like to compare queries to jacket copy. So when you go into bookstores and you pick up a book and you read the back of it, that exists so that you will respond with, I have to know what happens next, I want to buy this book. That's the response from us that you want to elicit with your query. And you can even structure it the same way too. Jacket copy will introduce your main character, maybe tell a little bit about the world they live in, if that's such a thing is important, lead you to the conflict and leave you wondering how that main character is going to resolve the conflict, what happens next. So that those are the same questions that you want your query to bring up.
Yeah, I think, so basically the purpose of your query is to introduce your book so that someone is like, I want to read that. That's the goal, is that your query is going to tell someone enough about your book that an agent or an editor is going to be like, great, I want to read it. And so I think, with that in mind, then, it's going to be part giving information, and answering the question, like, what is your book about? And then also, part sales pitch, in the sense that, if it doesn't sound exciting, then nobody is going to then be like, great, I want to read it. And basically, you need one because, and writing a novel and writing a query is definitely a different skill. And so, if you've written a novel or if you've written a nonfiction book proposal, obviously you've spent a lot of time and hard work and, perfecting your book. But it's long. And so you can't just be like, here, read this. Because, just looking around this room, there's a lot more of you than there is of us. So you have to basically do something to make us be like, yes, I'm going to pull this one from this pile or from this group of people, and this is the one I want to read.
So what are sort of the fundamentals of putting together a query? Are there basic sort of parts to follow that writers should do? Is there things like numbers approach?
Yeah. Okay, so I will actually say that you want your query to be about 250 words. Okay, so that's typically that would be like about a page. And no one is going to count your words, so you can go over, you can go under, but like you basically want enough words to tell what the book is about so that we're interested, but you don't want too many words. You're walking a fine line between, you know, I want the agent and editor to be like, ooh, that sounds good. I wonder what happens next. I want to read it. And you don't want us to be confused. So you're walking that line between like, I want you to be interested and intrigued, but I want to make sure that like you're more interested in me and in my book than the person next to you. And so I would say that you want to start with who is your character, what is the main conflict, and what are the stakes. You know, and obviously for anyone who pitched, that was kind of what we also said about your pitch, is like that's how you want to start. And so that's basically the best way to sort of like dive into it.
Yeah, and then after your sort of introductory paragraph, introduce your character, I heard another agent describe it as who, when, where, and why I should care. That'll be sort of your introduction. And then we do need a few facts about your book. The audience that you're writing for, whether it's middle grade, adult, young adult, the word count, and I know we'll probably talk about comp titles in a minute, but I mean comp titles that you can come up with. And then at the end of the query letter, you can put in a short bio about yourself. And seriously, if you're writing fiction, that's what's wonderful. Anyone can write fiction. So if you are an accountant by day and a writer by night, that's totally fine. Let us just know a little bit about who you are. And we're talking like 2 sentences. Your query should be at least 90% about the book and 10% about you. If not, 95 book, 5 you.
Agreed on what they said. To give like some just like mechanics, like basics. So you want to stick within the 1 page, like Suzie said. You want to make sure to cover the information that they both had gone over. Think about it like story pitch should come first. 1 to 3 paragraphs. Okay, and I'm not talking black paragraphs because remember, Suzie said a page. So 1 to 3 paragraphs. And then you want like 1 paragraph that's about the kind of like, I already hear mechanics of your story, but that is where you include word count, market, comp titles, genre. The difference between your market and your genre guides, by the way, is like the middle grade market is just for all those readers, the young adult market. And then of course you're like, well, I have a young adult fantasy. Fantasy is the genre. So they're 2 different things. If you don't know what your market or genre is, stick with the word count and comp titles. That we can help you figure that out. You should have an idea of what your market is if you read enough in that, but if your comp titles are extensive, it's clear that you read in that area. That is enough for most agents. And that mechanics paragraph can be part of the pitch if it fits, or it can be its own little 1 to 2 sentence paragraph, and then the bio paragraph. If you have publications that you want to include, that's the only time you'll really go more than 2 lines. If you have a lot of publications, just pick the couple of highlights of whatever they are. We don't need to know about all of them. If we love the book and we're talking to you, that's when we'll ask for more information. So, a little bit down helps.
I also just want to add, so for those couple paragraphs, whether it's like 2 or 3 paragraphs about the story, think about it, in terms of your query as like, you're beginning to tell a story. So you're setting up like the who, what, when, why, and then you're building off that. So the best queries are the ones where the suspense with like just like what the story's about builds from paragraph to paragraph. And so there's a query that I actually never got, but that when Joanna and I were both kind of starting out, one of our bosses or / mentors got a query, and for some reason, like it's always stuck with me, I think because it was just like really interesting. And it was for a crime novel, and it started out, and it was like, Ford Kelly is an ambulance driver by day and a driver for his hitman uncle by night. Okay, when his uncle dies mid-hit, the people who hired him come to Ford and say, you have to finish the job we paid him for, or we'll kill you. Okay, so right there you've got the character, we know a little bit about him, and now we have some stakes and some conflict. There's 3 names left on the hit list. They're all cops, dirty cops. And the last name on the list is his ex-wife. So you can see, like, it just kind of is like, ooh, they're cops. They're dirty cops, but I don't know how I feel about that. And oh my God, one is his ex-wife. And I think the last line of the query was something like, you know, Ford's about to discover, like, how good at killing he might be. And so you're kind of like, well, what does that mean? Like, who is he going to kill the cops? Is he going to maybe kill these bad guys? Like, what's going to happen? And so our mentor had requested it, and she ended up signing the book. And it was one of those queries where it was like really short, and yet it built that up. So you were like, and then what happens? And that's really what you want at the end of your query. Is like you want to be able to build those paragraphs so that the person reading it is like, and then what?
So that said, are there any hard don'ts?
Yes. Don't write your query in first person.
Oh God, especially if it's about a serial killer.
I think we've all had that query. Or, yeah, so that's where you always want to write in third person, be kind of professional and detached. Don't compliment our looks. It's creepy.
Yeah, they're like, oh, you're such a pretty smile. Thanks.
I think you're
red
gross.
hair.
Yeah.
Did that come in the same query as the one about the serial killer?
Yeah. Don't tell me you know where I live.
Yeah. That good. It says, like, one of the examples here is don't open with rhetorical question, and I think that's a little subjective.
Don't open my queries with a rhetorical
and same
question.
thing with me. And
Yeah, so here's the thing. 99% of the rhetorical questions are good. So I mean, like, it's one of those, it's kind of like the same kind of thing as like a writing rule that's like, don't open your book with your main character waking up. If you can do it and do it well, like, I'll happily be like, never mind, that works. Like, but a lot of the time it doesn't work. It reminds me, like, before I got into publishing, I was a teacher, and one time I made the terrible mistake of telling my freshmen, giving them an example of, like, you know, how you write a literary analysis and how you open your introduction. And I gave them an example where I must have said, imagine this. And all 30 papers came in with like, imagine you got shot, and like, you know, or whatever it was. And I was just like, oh my God, this is terrible, don't do this. So, and rhetorical questions is kind of the same thing, where like, a lot of times they come in and the question is meant to be rhetorical, and yet it'll be like, have you ever wanted this? And if I'm like, no. Now you lost me, because now I'm reading your query and I just said no. You never want the person to be thinking no while you're pitching them something.
yeah.
So I think that's the big danger of rhetorical questions is like, if it doesn't work, you've lost us. So I would say probably err on the side of avoiding them.
Yeah, and also another example here. I think whoever did this did the work for us. Don't address it dear agent. Like, you should be addressing a specific name, right? There's a reason you're querying us. There should be a reason you're querying us. You shouldn't just be going down the alphabet list of agents and just querying them with everything. And believe it or not, that happens quite a bit.
Yeah.
My favorites are the ones where they CC
Everybody. Yes.
and say, dear sir and or madam, and then like we all see each other's names on there, and we're all like, delete.
Well, and the
Yeah,
best
I
is
wouldn't reply to those.
Me either.
I don't either, but then sometimes you see, everyone's CC'd. So you do sometimes see colleagues then reply, and you're still all CC'd. And then also because this thing where you're like, oh my God, this query keeps popping up in my email, like just delete.
Yeah, it just happened.
And you cannot check enough times to make sure that you're addressing your query to the right agent with the right email address. If you want to have a query letter that you copy and paste into email, that's fine. Don't feel like you have to write a query letter to each individual agent, unless maybe like that agent said something in a blog interview. You could say, when I saw your interview that said you like horror, I thought you might enjoy my book. That's one thing. But I think I mentioned in an earlier panel, there is a literary agent who is in Canada who is named Carlie Waters.
Wow.
I get a lot of her email. I get email addressed to Kristen Nelson. I get email addressed to Suzie Townsend. So, I mean, seriously, 3 seconds would have remedied that. And as far as the address goes, I don't care. You can say, dear Ms. Weber. We're all grown-ups. I don't care if you call me Carlie. We can be on a first-name basis. That's fine. But call me something that's actually some form of my name. And please spell it right.
I was just gonna say, make sure it's proofread, proofread your queries, and it's actually really hard to proofread your own work because you know what you meant to say, you just read over mistakes, have someone else read it.
Yeah.
You don't need to have a professional editor read it.
And if you do, seriously, it'll be $25.
Yeah, it's like just make sure that there aren't grammar and spelling mistakes everywhere. You know, if an English teacher in your town can probably proofread your query letter, just a letter. You know, anybody who does a lot of writing can probably proofread a lot of reading. So.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, you wanna make sure, I mean, it's like, obviously, you've spent so much time on your book, you don't want it to look like you just threw your query together. And I can't tell you how many times that like in the first sentence of a query, there's like a glaring spelling or grammatical error. And you just don't want to set that first impression. And so like actually on our submission guidelines at New Leaf, you know, we say like you send it to the query email address and you put query dash one of our names in the subject line. And I can't tell you how many times query in the subject is spelled wrong.
Because then it doesn't get sorted. We have like
Yes.
a like sort.
That's what I do too.
So then when they spell it with 2 R's, it just
Or
sits
I-E.
in like this like.
I get EU after that.
Yeah, and then it just sits in this inbox if someone notices it and goes, oh, this was supposed to go to Susie's, but, yeah.
And the rules really do apply to you. I get so many emails, and they're probably the ones that are mass sent that say submission, title of book. Well, then that ends up in my inbox, which I reserve for people like clients and editors instead of my query pile. And then I have to make the effort to move it, and I already don't like you because you didn't take the 15 second. I mean, like I have a very, very simple website because I don't want to have to think about it. And it says under, I have a whole page that says submission guidelines. And I'd like to think that it's pretty clear. Send a query, put the word query in the subject line, and then the title of your book. If you can't do that, I don't trust you to turn your book in on time. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of effort to be professional and to follow the rules.
If I get a query in my inbox, because we don't accept queries to our inbox unless they've been personally, specifically requested by us, I will automatically reject it. I won't even look at it. I don't know who they are. I don't care. I just won't look at it.
And you probably don't care who we are either because you are taking the spaghetti approach. Yeah.
So I mean, I feel like a lot of those kind of, you know, can potentially sound obvious. So a couple maybe less obvious things. I think you want to, again, like kind of fitting in with the model of like being professional. You want to be careful that you don't come across as like too desperate. And I think like you want to think about it as like, you know, if you were going on a first date and you were like, I just really want to get married, you would like definitely turn off that person.
Yeah.
Like they'd be like, oh, I'm scared. So like if you're like, I get a lot of queries where people are like, thank you so much for reading my query. I know that you're so busy and like, I just like, thank you so much. And like the thank yous go on and it's kind of like, oh my, it's fun. I'm just doing my job.
Or I know you probably won't read
Yes,
this,
yes, we got a
but
lot of
I
those.
hope you will. I'm like, you know what? No, you're right. Reply, don't want to delete.
And so like I think you want to make sure that there isn't, you know, no matter how much you want to be published, like I get it, but you don't want to come across like you've been rejected all over town, basically. And sometimes people will include snippets of their rejection letters. Don't do that. Or they'll be like, you know, I certainly get queries where it's like, you know, I've queried 85 people and you're number 86, and I'm hoping that you're going to be the person that's right for me. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound great.
And also really on your 85th choice, like you should always make us feel like we're your first choice.
And then at the same time, you also don't want to sound like overly arrogant either. Like, don't tell me that your book is going to end up on Oprah, or it's going to be a movie, or it's going to make me millions of dollars, or like, I will kick myself if I don't represent your book. Because that just makes me be like, you don't know. You don't get it. You don't understand this industry. So, I mean, again, it's kind of like that walking that professional line, but I think, you know, you want to sound confident without offending anybody.
Yeah, it's like basic social interacting where you're like, I'm actually hoping to start a relationship with you. I don't know if it will happen, but I'm just going to put my best foot forward. So that's what it is. It's like, you know, if you do thank somebody, it's not like we're like, oh, thank you, you're so desperate. I just like it all depends. You guys are writers, right? And words are meaningful, and how you use them matter. And so the same thing goes into the letter, except you're addressing somebody very specific. To come back to the name thing really quickly, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I do get a little uncomfortable when someone just addresses me as Joe, because they've heard somebody I know. It's like my nickname, and they've heard somebody I know say it. So they're like, hey, Joe, I saw, you know, and I'm like, you don't have to say Ms., you can say Joanna Volpe, but like, that's a little too familiar too quickly, just makes me personally uncomfortable, but that's what it goes back to what I was saying, like social interacting, like, would you do that to somebody you just met too, that you were hoping to start a friendship with, or a relationship in some way? Probably not. You'd probably be like, is it cool to call you Joe? Cool. You know, it'd be like that moment.
Yeah. I always say, think of your query letter as a job interview for your book. It's better to show up overdressed to a job interview, and it's better to be a little too formal in your letter. I would rather see somebody err on the side of boring and professional than cuckoo. And if you're querying an agency that wants snail mail queries, I don't take them, but before I opened my own agency, I worked for an agency that did. White paper, 12-point single-space Times New Roman. Do not do fancy fonts. Don't write in a font smaller than 12 point. Because a lot of us, I can speak for myself, I have terrible vision, I can't read anything smaller than 12 point. I'm not gonna get out a freaking magnifying glass. Don't send packages to agents with treats in them. They might be poison, and I joke in my thing that the only packages I accept, I only take pens or Sephora gift cards or Moleskine notebooks. Everything else goes in the trash. The agency I worked at was dog friendly. We had somebody send us a query along with a box of dog treats, because the dogs were like on the agency website. And it's like, you have a nice heart, but you don't know what's in there.
Most of us are New Yorkers or lived there for a time, so we're like, no man.
Hell.
Don't trust anybody.
The craziest query that my boss ever received when I was an assistant is it came in a Starbucks cup, which like, I had no idea that you could send a Starbucks cup in the mail, but apparently like as long as you tape it up and the address is visible, the post office will send it. And so they sent a Starbucks cup, and it's all taped. And so, you know, I'm an assistant, and I'm like, well, listen, see what's in here. And I opened it up, and it was like poof of like white powder.
This was 2009.
Oh!
And drugs.
Right, so, and I was like, oh my God, I'm dead. And since I was already dead, I looked at the letter, and the first line says, does this flower make you think of snow? The example of a rhetorical question that does not work. I was like, no, it makes me think of anthrax. No, it's fine. It's fine, no, it's fine. So yeah, don't do that. And if you're sending stuff stuff through, most of the time, if you're sending stuff through email, then obviously like your contact information is there. And I would say that I would recommend email. It's easier to track. It's cheaper, like all that stuff. It's faster interaction. But if you're sending it through the mail, make sure that your address and contact information are on there. I once had someone, they broke a lot of rules. They sent me the manuscript without the query. They also sent me a handbag and tissues to read when I cried reading the manuscript. And like there were treats and stuff in there too. It was a really big box. And there was no contact information. So like I had intended to send the gifts back, and they couldn't even do that. I wouldn't have been able to respond to the person if I liked their manuscript, because there was just no contact information at all.
And I also would, you can put links in your emails. That's fine, especially if you have social media handles. I always like, 'cause I'm gonna search you anyway. Pretty creepy that way. But you might as well just give it up and let me know where you are and how you mind. But I would avoid attaching anything unless specifically asked to, because sometimes I can go right to a spam filter, or sometimes I'm like, I don't know, this could also, I didn't request this, this could be a virus. So if there's some weird attachments, I might not open it. And what she was saying with like the color of the paper and the font and all that stuff, it actually also does apply to email. I've gotten inquiries that are like, a yellow font, because it'd be like, discover the mystery in this email. Because yellow against white's really tough, and I'm like, no, I don't.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Yeah, I don't know, discover the mystery or anything like that. So anything that's kind of like a little bit assaulting on the eyes. We're reading so many of them. So again, don't make it easy to be like delete and next.
Yeah, with that respect, paragraph breaks. Every like 4 lines, new paragraph. Because like the big blocks of text can be really hard to read.
Now, I know we've touched on this briefly already, but what is your stance on personalization and what's appropriate?
Do it, and there are several certainly professional options. We don't like Dear Agent. I get Dear Editor a lot. I'm like, you don't even know what I do all day. As far as names, however, we have our name professionally listed on our either on our social media or on the website itself. My name is Carlisle, like the vampire in Twilight. I go by Carlie because it's much easier to spell and pronounce. Although, thank you, Stephanie Meyer, Carlisle has made it a little more mainstream. So if you want to address, because everyone calls me Carlie, so if you want to address the letter Dear Carlie, that's fine. Dear, we're all grown-ups. Err on the side of professional, Dear Ms. Weber. If you're not, there are agents out there that have non-gender specific names. Google them and find out. Like Taylor Martindale Keene. She's female, by the way. So yeah, look it up, Dear Ms. Keene. You can never go wrong with a more formal introduction. I don't like Dear Esteemed Carlie Weber, Dear Awesome Agent Carlie Weber, because I'm not the rock star here. My writers are the rock stars. I sit and collect the money and deal with contracts and things like that. So again, it's a job interview. Show up, be more formal than you have to, even if you think that's boring. Leave the drama for your plot development.
I really thought you were going to say mama.
I can if you want me to.
So, and this is where obviously like you're dealing with individual people, so like it's going to be subjective. I think that if you haven't heard someone speak in person about it, then err on the side of professionalism always. You just can't go wrong with that. But honestly, I just don't care. I don't care what you call me. I don't care. I don't care if it's Suzie. I don't care if it's Dear Mr. Townsend. Like, I don't care because I don't actually read what you're calling me. I get 200 to 300 queries a week. When they come in, I just don't even look at that. I just look directly at what is your book about. So I just don't care, because, and I've had people sometimes do the thing where like they've accidentally addressed it to like another agent. I've certainly seen the like Dear Kristen Nelson in there, and I miss it unless people parrot it back to me all the time. And I think that it's like one of those things where like, you can certainly have that kind of book, and yes, I did mean it, I do like those things, but I expect that when I read about your story, I'm just gonna know that like you're gonna show me that that's what's in your book and that's why I'll like it. And I think that it's just one of those things where like, I assume like you're erring on the side of professionalism, I'm erring on the side of the fact that like, I might be a rock star, and that's why you're querying me. And so like, I'm just gonna assume that you've done your research, you've looked me up, you think I'm gonna be a good fit, and I just wanna know what your book is about. And then all of the other stuff, for me, comes after I've read the book, and I'm like, oh, I really like this. I wanna know more about who this person is. So, yeah, I just don't, dear Suzie, dear sir, I don't care. This one.
I mean, because it's one of those things that because there's a disparity there on the side of caution, she won't care anyway. But there are people who do, right? And that's what you got. I am a little bit more like Carlie, so it's like, yeah, I would like you to use my name, but I also will admit that I skip that. I think, like, I look over your eyes, just like scroll over it, and if something's quoted back to me that I said, I just skip, I just skim read that, and like get the meat of the story. I will also admit that I skip down to the pages sometimes first. Like I'll just be like, all right, let me go down there, and then once like if I read a few paragraphs and I'm like, oh, that's great, I'll go back up and read query in more detail. When I'm skipping down, like I'm getting a quick snapshot of what it is. Like I can't explain like how when you read enough queries, you can actually almost like see the query and pick up paranormal YA, whatever. You're like, okay,
Yeah.
now in one glance.
Let's horrify them. We take 60 seconds to read a query.
Maybe less.
Maybe less.
Yeah, maybe less, because we get like hundreds a week.
Mm-hmm.
So
And there's only one of me, and I don't have, my assistants can't read. I joke, because my assistants have paws and tails and say meow. Like those are the associates in CK Weber Associates.
that you know of, by the way. Cats are smart.
Not mine. But like seriously, I'm looking for those keywords that will push the I want to read this buttons.
Yeah.
The minute I read Al Qaeda, delete. Because I like my thrillers domestic. That's just the way I am. So I know that doesn't push the I want to read this button. It's not me, it's you. Or no, it's not you, it's me. That's right.
It's subjective, right? It's all about, we rep stuff we want to work on. So just because it's not for me doesn't mean it's not for Suzie or Carlie. Just kidding around, I'm so sorry.
That was a question like, oh yeah, no, it's fine. Actually, to sort of piggyback on what you were just saying, when you say you're skimming through and looking for keywords, like what sorts of keywords are you looking for, or what sorts of things make you note right out of something other than Al Qaeda?
Okay, so it's this is obviously going to be like very subjective, and some of you may have heard this story from one of the authors here. Mermaids freak me out. I just can't get over them. Like,
It's so funny in the office, because some people in our office love them, and we love them.
they have tails. And like, if it's a mermaid romance, like, how does that work? It's really creepy. And like, how do they talk underwater? I don't get it. And I get really hung up on that. And so like mermaids, they're just not for me. Like I've never been able to read a mermaid book. And I've tried many times. And I just can't get into it because I get really hung up on how things work. And then I start getting creeped out because it's like, are their tails slimy?
You put a lot of thought into this.
And like, how does like the tail transition to skin? Like, I think back to like the Little Mermaid, and even though I still don't understand like how they managed to talk underwater, but like it
Like
looks
rescue
not.
mermaid tail.
No, it's really creepy. It's creepy. I also don't love zombies. Like they're a little creepy, and like zombie romance, do they smell? Like, how do they smell each other? Like, again, it's kind of creepy. I just don't know that I can handle it. And so, like, those are things that for me, like, it's like, if I start reading or skimming or looking at it and I'm like, mermaids or zombies, like, those are things that for me, it's just an automatic, like, not my thing. Then, like, things like, if it's not something I represent, poetry, screenplays, business books, like, whatever, that's also things where it's just like, no, not for me. It's a little bit harder when it's something like, you know, YA. I'm going to use YA as an example just because probably I do get a lot of YA queries, but like the market's saturated, and a lot of markets are, but like when you get something and it just starts to sound like everything else. There are, you know, like certain phrases like the chosen one, or I don't know, I'm having trouble, like love triangle, vampire, like things like that just kind of make it feel like, I've read that. And you don't want me to feel like that, because if I've already read that, then I'm not going to want to read yours. So, I mean, I think that's when you have to be like kind of careful in talking about your book so that it sounds unique and original, and so that your character is kind of like coming off the page to be like, read me.
Let's see, things that push my hell no button. If I can't pronounce a word in the title of your book, automatic rejection. I find that, the biggest sinners on this are people who write speculative fiction. It's all the tale of some random made-up name. I don't do well with random made-up names. I said in another panel that I like my fantasy with characters named Harry, Ron, and Hermione, not Legolas, Bilbo, and Aragorn. That's not for me. Also, my latest pet peeve is when a female character is introduced with her looks. I'm like, it can only go downhill from here. I've almost never seen a male character introduced solely by his looks. And I'm like, if this is how the query is this going to be like the main focus, and is this going to be what makes her an interesting character? No. Let's see. I actually have, if you want to follow me on Twitter, I will sometimes do a hashtag called I pass on your query because, and I'll do lists. Sometimes I pass because there's no way I can sell a 50,000 word adult thriller. And the thing is, we really don't have the time to personalize the reasons why we pass on the thing. Sometimes it just doesn't sound that interesting. Sometimes it's something we've seen a million times before. Sometimes just like, oh, hell no. I saw one that looked really interesting because the author compared it to Wayward Pines. And I was like, yeah, I love Wayward Pines. But then on the first page, there were young women, and this is like a modern set novel, there were young women described as co-eds. And I'm like, yeah, Al-Qaeda I don't do espionage. Sometimes it's hard, it's like I know I don't want it when I see it. And I also know that I'm not looking for vampires right now. I have a client who said, I got a vampire novel, and I said, what else you got? Because I love you and I think you're a great writer, but my job is to make you money, and I know I can't make you money with that particular book. And if you have really terrible comp titles, which we can talk about soon, if you say, my book is just like Harry Potter, Twilight, and the Hunger Games, no, it isn't.
To go with so there's very few words that'll be like automatic turn off for me. It's just think about yourselves, right? You watch, you go to the movies and they show like a dozen trailers before movies these days. And like you just know, like that one interests me, that one doesn't. And it could be at different points in your life, different types of movies interest you. That's exactly what it's like for us reading queries. And so when you say what keywords do you look for, and that changes all the time because it depends on what I'm consuming as a reader and a movie watcher and a TV watcher and a YouTube watcher. Like myself, what I'm consuming, I also play video games. So sometimes it's like, whatever I'm like super into at that moment, like there might be some keywords that remind me of it in aquarium reading that like a year before. I might have just completely skimmed over. So do remember that we are consumers of entertainment just like you are, and so therefore like our tastes change over time. And also sometimes like, you know, like I love video games, but after a while you're like, I've played enough for the past like 6 months. Like I just need a break from video games even though I love them. And that's what happens when we feel like we've seen a lot of a particular subject. It's just like, you just need a break. It doesn't mean I won't want to see vampires again soon. Like I've read them throughout my lifetime many times.
And they are on a cycle. They're like on a 15 to 20 year cycle in terms of popularity.
Literally, Salem's Lot is one of my top 5 books of all time. Terrifying vampires. You know, and so it's like, of course, I will look for another book that scratches that same itch one day. So there's like no, I don't have any words that like turn me off. Like not like incest doesn't even turn me off. Like I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm interested. What kind of incest? I mean, I've read Flower Organic. Let's see what this is about.
My first sale was an incest book.
Right, there you go. So it's like it really, you know, like what would, and I don't know, Suzie, like what would turn me off, I guess? It would have to be like blatantly racist or something.
Yeah, or misogynistic.
Or misogynistic, like and it would have to be like deeply misogynistic in a way like where the character, it's not about like,
I think it would have
the character
to be,
didn't know
it's
that
not
shit.
that it's not
Stuff.
that a character is racist or misogynistic. I think sometimes you sort of get an undertone as to whether maybe that's the author's beliefs.
Yes.
And that.
I can deal with a character being anything bad or good, right? Because that's the whole point of telling stories. It's, yeah.
Or if someone was like, here's my book, I don't want to do anything for it.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I should actually say that's the thing that would turn me off. If they're like, I don't want to do anything for it, you do your magic and I will sit back and collect checks.
Yes.
That would be, that's like the only thing.
And I will also say, and like, here's the challenge to you. I dare you to send me a mermaid novel. That won't creep me out. Because, and I can say that because years ago, in, no, didn't like it. I guess it was like 2011, maybe earlier than that. I got into an argument on Twitter with a very well-known, very successful self-published author because she was like, you should represent new adult. And I was like, that's not a thing. And she was like, well, it is a thing because people are buying it. And I said, well, only if it's self-published. No one is buying it. Like, I, as an agent, I'm not representing new adult because no editors are buying it. If I go to an editor and I'm like, here's a new adult book, they're like, well, that's not a thing. And so I think in the end, we were actually arguing different points because I was telling her that if new adult wanted to be a thing, it needed to like start as like a marketing conversation, not from like the editor side of things. But we had this argument on Twitter, and it was like, I don't know, 6 months later, an author sent me a query, and it was a book that she self-published, and she opened, and I mean, it was a smart query letter, because she opened with the fact that she'd self-published this book, that it was a new adult romance, and it sold 5,000 copies in 4 days. And it was on, like, it was like number 2, I believe, behind Casual Vacancy on paid Kindle. And she was like, it's only on Kindle and BNN, and I've already had editors and agents reaching out to me. And she was like, you actually read a manuscript of mine a year ago and gave me some feedback, and I'm wondering if you'd like to look at this book. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll look at it. I mean, if it sold that many copies in that many days, and if I read something of hers before, why not? So I looked at it, and I read it, and it was really funny, and it was really good, and I was like, I really like this. So I went back to her and was like, yes, actually, I totally want to work with you. And I'm not gonna lie, in my head, I was still thinking, new adult is not really a thing in mainstream traditional publishing. But this book is really good. It's selling really well. And we could pitch it to adult publishers as contemporary romance with crossover appeal. And so that was my plan. And we signed together, and the day that we signed together, the book hit number 15 on the New York Times ebook list. It had sold 32,000 copies in its first week, and it was losing it by Cora Carmack. And so, of course, we signed together, and the next day I sent it to a bunch of editors. It went to a 7-house auction, so 7 editors bid for the book. And it then was taken over by HarperCollins. And when I sent it to people, half the editors I sent it to were kind of like, yeah, new adult might be becoming a thing. And half of them were like, yeah, it's contemporary romance with crossover appeal. And I was like, okay. And of course then, at least for a year, new adult was a thing. And it became a thing, and it was a hot thing. And then there was too much of it, and then people were like, never mind, it's not a thing anymore. So it was kind of a rise and fall of new adult. But the point is I said, it's not a thing, don't send that to me. And then someone sent it to me, and I was like, never mind, this is a thing. And so you will sometimes get people who are like, I don't want to see that. And then they might not know that they don't want to see it until they see it. And obviously we get a lot of queries. But for you as a writer, thinking about you and your story, it never hurts for you to send the query to people. Because the worst that's going to happen is they're going to say, no thanks. And you're no worse off than you were before. So as long as you are professional and polite and respectful, you're not going to get blacklisted because you sent me a mermaid bone. I'm not going to hold it against you. So, and you know what? You might make me put my foot in my mouth and be like, actually, mermaid novels creep me out, except this one. So.
Can I ask a quick question related to that? Yeah. I noticed you guys mentioned sometimes the horrible ones that you just delete immediately. Do you usually respond even if it's no to let us know it's a no, or not necessarily?
So at New Leaf, our policy is actually that when you send in the query, and as long as you spell query right, and you follow the submission guidelines, you will get an automatic response to let you know that it's been received. So it's confirming receipt, and it lets you know that if you don't hear from us in 4 weeks, then that no response is a no. And I believe there's something in there about after 4 weeks, if you want to revise your query and send it to a different agent within the agency, go for it. But that's our policy, and it's just there are so many queries, and that taking the time to respond becomes just time that we don't have. And I can't tell you how many people, when you respond, even with a form rejection, how many people come back and email you again, and
It's messy. Yeah, I have a form rejection that I send because I've got it set up where I read it on my tablet, and I have a signature file that I fill in automatically, and basically with a query that I don't want, I can just hit reply, send.
Yeah.
So in that regard, because I've got it worked out to something that I can do incredibly quickly, then I do try to respond to everything. But I will just delete it on red if it's addressed to 65 other agents that I can see in the 2 field.
Yeah.
So we've danced around this a little bit, so let's talk about cons. Do's, don'ts, crazy stories that you want to share.
If anybody was in the morning panel with me, I went on a whole thing about comps, and I will do it again here because I know that there are some new folks here. So comp titles are super important for so many reasons. Comp titles are used at the very early stage of you pitching your book, and then they are used when we pitch the publisher, and it's also used when the editor loves a book and they're pitching their sales force and marketing team in-house, and then it's used after they buy the book, and the sales team is then pitching accounts like B&M, and then it's used when you're a bookseller and you're like, you should read this book because, it's like this and it's like that. And it's not a joke. It is literally, that is why they are so important. That is how publishers come up with the amount of money in which to offer you an advance, is based on the comp titles, especially if you're a debut author. If you have a long publication history, they will also base it on your past sales as an author. But if you are a debut, or you're someone who's writing in a completely new genre from what your previous work was in, they will go based on the comp titles. They do not want to see comp titles that are outliers. The outliers are all the really, really, really big books, like Harry Potter, The Da Vinci Code, Fifty Shades of Grey, Hunger Games, Divergent. Pretty much if something became a movie, I would actually avoid it. It's an outlier. Anything like that. They don't want to see that because you can't, there was a circumstance in which made it into what it was. You know, there was, whether it would be right place, right time, or the film, or whatever it is, an award, major award. So you can't use the outliers. And you also want your compiler titles to actually be published within the past 3 years. Because that is the only way they can accurately say, these are something we can compare sales to. If it was published 20 years ago, how are they going to compare sales since it's been out that long? Comp titles, there's 2 different types. There's your creative editorial comp titles, and those are the ones that you use as an author, and probably the ones that you guys use more frequently when you're talking about your book, because they're the ones that inspire you. And those are things that like compare your book in terms of theme, genre, character, writing style, like those kinds of things. And it's okay to have some of those, and it's okay for some of those to even be older titles. I got a lot of things that, you know, use Ender's Game or something like that as a comp title.
Yeah, you send me something with Flowers in the Attic as a comp title, I'm gonna put that in front of my face.
Yeah, these are old titles, but I look at that as like a creative editorial
Yes.
title. That will likely not be what I use to sell the book, or if it is, I will use 2 other comp titles that are within the past 3 years. You know, then there's the sales comp titles, and that's where you're really thinking of like, this will appeal to the readers of these books. So, like I said, that helps all the way down. And the big thing for you guys to come up with it, like the reason why, if you can come up with it, that it's important, is because then you're controlling the messaging of your own book. If you don't tell me what your comp titles are, I'm going to read it and I'm going to come up with them. If I can't figure out what they are, the publisher's going to read it and they're going to come up with them. And if they're looking to buy your book, of course they're going to read and come up with the comp titles that will allow them to offer you the least amount of money. You know, like that is the way it works. So control your own messaging. If you really want to target readers of X, Y, and Z, like if you feel like in your heart of hearts, because that's where you're a fan of it, then make sure that that's what you want people to be comparing your work to. Those are my thoughts on content.
Those are excellent.
I have a quick kind of follow-up question for that. Like, say your comp title is part, or one of your comp titles is part of a series, and maybe the later books in that series were within the past 30 years, but the original was not. Does that disqualify it from being?
I would just have more than one.
Right.
I
Okay.
mean, it's
Yeah. I would say that too, or you could even list the comp title with the series as a whole, so that they get the sort of overall view. So the kiss of death in a query regarding comp titles is when you say, this book is not like any other book out there.
And that's why there's no comp title.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. Or, you know, there are no good YA titles on friendships or kids with cancer. Yes, there are. And now you've just told me that you don't actually read the genre you're trying to sell. Didn't. So go do some research. I can tell you YA librarians are the nicest, most enthusiastic people about books you'll ever encounter. And librarians in general. We love, and I say we because I'm also a librarian in addition to being an agent. They love recommending books to people. That's like the best part of my job. Think about your title, and you can go in and ask a librarian, have you got anything like, have you got a modern Western or something that might feel like a Western set in space? They will help you find stuff. There are databases. The biggest one is called Novelist, and a lot of libraries subscribe to it, and you can even go to your local library and use it. And you can find books by subject or character type, and start building your read-alikes list from there. But really, I highly recommend a recon mission to your local bookstore to start looking at your comp titles. Because there you've got all the fresh new titles. Okay, this is what's selling, this is what people are buying. And then, yes, there is a book like yours out there. And you've got to find it, because if you don't, your publisher will for less money.
And to switch over to a different area now, for the author bio, what should a writer do if he or she doesn't have any publishing credits? How do you approach that?
Just tell us who you are as a person. Tell us about your job. I mean, I always mention my client who's a DEA agent, debut author, had never written a book in his life. I'm okay with that. One of the things that can really help you is talking about your job, especially if it relates to the book you've written. Tess Gerritsen is a doctor who writes medical thrillers. John Grisham is a lawyer who writes legal thrillers. So if you've never written a book before, but you are inspired by what you do all day, we love to hear that. That's great. And if it hasn't, I mean, I always say Stephen King never killed anybody that we know of. J.K. Rowling didn't go to wizard school. And it's really okay if you're just, an accountant by day and a writer by night. If you're writing fiction, nonfiction is a different beast altogether.
I do want to know if you work in an industry that's related to books, too. So if you are a librarian or something, but it's really easy to be like, I'm a librarian and mother of two from Nebraska. Like, that's fine.
Yeah. Or like if you're part of any kind of writer organization, if you're part of CWI, RWA, like whatever it is, that's always good. If you sometimes at like a conference, everyone I've had people who will query and be like, oh, and the first chapter of this novel won an award at this conference, and like that's always nice to know. Like it's not gonna make or break anything. And most of the time, like unless you're Stephen King or a Kardashian or you have 1 million followers on Twitter, like your bio probably isn't gonna make or break whether we're gonna request your book. It's really more about your book anyway, but it never hurts to have, something about who you are as a person in there.
And do you always read sample pages?
Not if the query is pushing the hell no button.
Yeah, when I first started agenting, I read the whole query and I read all the sample pages. And I think that's, people sometimes will ask me like, well, do you read your queries or do you does your assistant read your queries? And I would say that you want the assistant to be reading the queries because they're always going to read more of missing something that could get them fired. But when I first started, I read everything, and I went to a conference one time, and an agent who'd been in the industry for many years was sitting next to me, and someone asked this question, and I was like, I read everything, and he was like, I read the first line. Yeah, if I like it, and I'm hooked, I read the second line. If I'm still hooked, I read the third line.
Okay, I'll read it until you give me a reason to stop.
Yeah, and he was like, if, at the point that I'm not hooked anymore, I stop. And I was like, so harsh. Now I can be like, oh my God, it's so true. And it is that kind of thing where oftentimes, if I look at the query and it feels like something where I'm like, ooh, I could be interested in this. I skim down, I'll look at the pages, and it really is that kind of you read the first line or so, and if it's like, ooh, then you keep going, or I might go back and read the query, or I might just be like, yes, I want to see this. Or I might just be like, meh, and then go on to the next one.
Yeah, sometimes I love the premise and then the first pages are, I wake up and I'm late for school and I rush into the bathroom and I look in the mirror and rush, oh, no, I'm just not willing to wait that long to get to the good stuff. And I tell myself, because I'm super harsh, the minute I see a character waking up in bed, but then I have to tell myself, that's how the Hunger Games starts. But the Hunger Games is an outlier.
Do we have any questions?
For comp titles, how do you guys feel about books written by people you understand?
Sure. Yeah. Because obviously I like their writing. I might like yours too.
You don't like that?
I was like, where you're
Don't just pull them offline though, because I can't tell you how many times people say something is like my book that isn't out yet and there isn't even an arc. Like I just sold it. And I'm like, you liar. Oh man. That happens a lot, actually.
Or it's something where you're like, I sold that on a napkin. There's not even a manuscript. Well, and there's also a little bit of that, you know, if you're pitching something that, you know, if you're pitching a dystopian where there's 5 factions and a girl doesn't fit into one of the factions, and then you're like, it's like Divergent meets blah, blah, blah. Like, that's probably not for Joanna because she already has Divergent, and that sounds just like it.
I had somebody pitch to me, even during this session, that they said they had a sci-fi retelling of a Shakespeare play, and that's just too similar to a book I sold earlier this month. So sometimes it's not you, it's we don't want to cannibalize our own lists. Maybe there's a reason why after the Twilight series came out, Little Brown didn't publish another vampire book for 10 years. Because they were like, you know, they were not the vampire publisher, but they also didn't want to compete with themselves. You have a Greek gods book, I'm probably not going to send it to Hyperion.
Other questions? Yes.
So I think it's one of the things that I've noticed about submission guidelines is a lot of times it'll show sample pages, but then it'll want word count for the entire manuscript. And so sometimes, you know, as someone who really wants to follow all the rules and you'll say, okay, it's 25 pages, it's like, okay, I get that, you know, standard manuscript format, but is it kind of a judgment call of like, okay, this is like in the middle of a sentence, or I can finish a scene, you know, like.
You can, look, if it goes to page 26 and it's only like a couple of lines because you wanted to finish the paragraph or something, that's fine. But if you're like 27 because I wanted to finish the scene, like I'm kind of like, yo man, you just didn't pay attention. You can find somewhere else to cut before that point. So I don't really know any agent that would be like, oh, you went over one line, I see why you did it. Like,
Yeah,
they do it.
oh, but it is really important that you send us, like, I ask for either 30 pages or 3 chapters, whichever is more. Don't send me pages 61 through 91.
Don't do that.
Send me pages 1 through 30. Always.
Always.
Send the beginning of your book.
And if you have a prologue or a first chapter and you're feeling like, oh, I don't know that's gonna hook them, like my chapter 2 is a better chapter, then you shouldn't have that first chapter.
Then you need to go back and fix the first chapter.
Yeah, because it's not just us. You guys go book shopping, you read a description, like, you open the first chapter, and if you're bored, you put it down and go buy the book. Same thing.
And if you open to the middle, you are an outlier. And don't use you as an example.
I always read the first 10 pages and then the last 5 pages, and then I go back.
I can't do the last pages. I just do it.
I can't do it.
I need to.
I know, I realized that in this, I'm like, you know, I was like, spoil me. I'm okay with this.
Other questions? Other questions?
Should you put that in the query for them, that somebody specifically directed you there?
Yeah, if someone specifically was like, I mean, I know what you're asking me because that was me. So if someone was like, oh, I think this agent will like this, then yes, like that's fine. You can say, like I met Suzie Townsend at a conference and she suggested I send you this word.
Make sure that, like, though, that that's a good connection, because I actually also get a number of queries where they're like, so-and-so said I should query you, and I may, like, know, like, who they are, but, like, I don't know them, so it's not meaningful, because I'm like, what it makes me think is, oh, they just wanted to, like, get it off their plate, so they're just giving them a list of names. So you should make sure it's meaningful, and usually, if it's something at a conference, like, Suzie recommends you send me something, she'll be like, oh, I, like, worked next to Joanna for, like, 7 years, you told us this her. Meaningful. If she's like, you know, but if someone's just like, who could you go to? I know so-and-so reps this, like, that's not a
will they be able to work out their communication issues, or like if it's a romance. And I just feel like it works so much better if you just get rid of the question and you make it an active sentence. It just gives the stakes better. I think that a lot of times the question, like Joanna said, it starts to come off as like very sort of like melodramatic.
And this applies to your manuscript.
GMTA.
So I have seen a lot of manuscripts, and even like clients of mine whose books I've signed and edited, there will be points where, let's say, Jenny wasn't sure that she could make the jump across the ravine is stronger than could Jenny make the jump across the ravine? Because then your author's voice gets too loud and it takes you out of the character's head. So same thing for the query. You don't want to say, will Katniss Everdeen die in the Hunger Games? You say, Katniss Everdeen isn't sure she can survive the Hunger Games.
Yeah, I've seen many editors make that note in manuscripts. They just like too many internal questions that the character's asking themselves. It just kind of comes across as much more passive. It weakens the internal dialogue, the internal monologue, narrative. That's the word I was thinking of. The internal narrative. It weakens it. Like you want it to be more active. Because in actuality, think about your thoughts. Like, how often do you pose questions in your own mind to yourself? It's not that you never do it, but it's certainly not as frequently as sometimes I see in manuscripts. Usually I'm thinking very actively. Like, so I don't know.
Other questions?
I just wanted to ask in terms of some of the things that like really caught your attention for like good prompts. What about bad ones that like like what things like really just could you remember as being absolutely terrible, like you never addressed it again?
Inquiries?
Yes, sorry.
Like specific, like you want an anecdote, like a story, or?
Sure, yeah, I was just wondering if there was anything that like just really stood out to you as like that's a really bad no. Like teachers notes give examples of like this is a 5 and this is a 0,
Don't tell me I'm an idiot if I don't want to represent your book. I've had that happen to me.
Yeah. Don't engage, don't be so clever about your engagement that it becomes a chore. Like that's happened to me a couple of times, Suzie, the 2 examples that I'm thinking of on the top of my head, but the one I will tell is like, okay, I got a wedding invitation to the office and it was beautiful. It was like an actually beautifully designed wedding invitation. It has nice, like the tissue paper and all that stuff. And I was like, oh God, how did I not remember this couple? Like, specifically invited me to their wedding, and I can't remember it. And I'm going around like, and it came to my business, so I'm like, it has to be someone industry related. So I'm going around the office being like, do you guys know this couple? Is it something I missed? And like Suzie, it was like, no, and no one knew who they were. And then someone said, was there like, sometimes wedding invitations have multiple cards in it, like for like pick your food, and then also like for the photography or the website, the wedding website, go here. And so I was like, oh, I actually didn't, look at the envelope, I didn't pull out the other card, they just pulled the invite. And so I pulled out the other cards and they all were there, and like one of them was like, go to the wedding website. I'm like, oh good, I'll see a picture, I'll recognize these people. And I go there and it was like, welcome agent, this is the query for my romance novel. And I was like, mofo, I just wasted I was so annoyed. So it was like too clever about the engagement that I'm like, I don't even care, it's like the next Nick Sparks. Like, no. I was so frustrated. So I think like that try not to go overboard. That was terrible. That was embarrassing. I didn't look at everybody else in the office and be like, it was fake. And everyone was like, what? So I bothered multiple people. It was just
Still send your glamour shot.
Or a naked shot.
I got a great one. It's my favorite. the first one is take Jem and Scout from To Kill a Mockingbird and imagine a series of young adult novels, watching them grow up, so that Scout becomes a lawyer and Jem becomes a vigilante who is not quite a Dexter. And she has to defend him, but what if she thinks he's morally wrong? And the second idea, Valkyries, Demons, Zombies. These are three words from your recent sales. And it was like, imagine wordless picture books about Valkyries, Demons, and Zombies. I have a friend, in parentheses, not a good friend, who's written a triple trilogy about Valkyries, Demons, and Zombies. And that could be the basis for the wordless picture books. Okay. There's many things wrong with this. Many things wrong with this. And then at the very end, it goes, I live in Brooklyn. You live in Brooklyn. I have 2 dogs. You have 2 dogs. My daughter has red hair. You have red hair. I'm usually fun to work with, and you look chill. Now, I mean, like, there's just so many things wrong with that. Like, nothing is right. Like, they're ideas, it's not actually books, and
It's
like,
actually their idea.
and they're not his ideas, and it's like this, you don't have those rights, you can't just use Jem and Scout, you can't use this triple trilogy, and like, unless you're the illustrator, like, what part of the wordless picture book are you gonna do? I mean, it was just so wrong, and I probably read it to like everyone in the office, and I was just like, what is this? I was like really mad, and now it's been years, and it is always when people are like, what's the worst query you've ever done? It's like a tie for the Anthrax Starbucks cup and the wordless picture book / Jem and Scout idea. I mean, it just, I don't know.
I can't even get anywhere near that. Probably because I only take email queries, so I don't get fun stuff in the mail anymore. I mean, I'm sure I must have a terrible, the only one that I really remember is the naked picture one, which I don't think the guy was sending it from prison, but he had an extensive prison record. Yeah, I used to get a lot of prison queries when I interned at Writer's House, because Writer's House takes snail mail queries. And you used to, they would bear the postmark and they'd be handwritten with pencil on like legal size paper, and I would open a lot of those prison queries, which I don't get anymore because I only do email.
So. Is this extensive prison record in the query or?
I was not good at that kind of research. You put it in his bio. Yeah. Does that answer your question? I wasn't really sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we might have time for one more question. Yes.
Okay, when it comes time to send a partial or a full manuscript, is standard manuscript format still the format to go with?
It is.
Okay.
Because I don't know what you guys read on. So what I do for reading manuscripts is I'll have someone send me a full manuscript and I'll tell them that I want it in Microsoft Word. And then I'll forward it to my Kindle. Because I use the e-ink Kindle that can't read PDFs very well. And because that's the easiest way for me physically to read it. Mostly you'll get instructions from the agent on how they want your manuscript. So mine, when I request it, I say, send it to me, put this subject line, because if you reply with the word query, it's just gonna go right back in the unsolicited query pile. So I'll say, put this subject line, send me the manuscript in this format. And then I'll say a little bit about the agency. That's where I say, our standard take is 15% monies earned, and we
manuscript format that I always learned was Courier font and underlines instead of italics.
Yeah, I don't.
Was that like 4 versions of the Chicago Manual of Style ago?
That was like, was it for screenplays maybe or something?
Well,
Like,
I know
I've seen
exactly
that
what you're
before.
talking about, and I would say that's like kind of left over from like before
The standalone
word
days.
processing.
Okay.
And so I mean, if your manuscript is in Courier New, like it's probably not going to offend anybody. But I would say that Times New Roman is just easier.
Okay.
I'll probably change it if I got it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't sit there and be like, well, never mind, Brian, take that.
Okay.
Like, I would change it.
And I would say that there's nothing wrong with italicizing and underlining. I want to say that like sometimes when it's like underlined, like I find that annoying. That might just be me though, so like it's kind of like who cares. But I think with the way that word processing has become so standard now, I think really the default has moved to Times New Roman. Don't worry about your underlines versus italicizing. So.
I just want to give one more piece of advice before you guys go away. While you guys are querying, work on your next book. You should be working on your next project. Otherwise, you're going to be just too focused on the querying process and really nervous about it. But also, when I am interested in working for somebody, I'll be like, what are you working on next? And it's pretty much, editors will have that same question, agents will have that same question, etc. So just make sure you're constantly trying to improve your craft and working on your stuff.
And also, I would say like my one piece of advice, I guess if we're wrapping up, don't give an agent a query exclusive, especially if it's unsolicited. You're just hurting